We are here to bring you everything and anything surrounding Porsche. I'm Mike.
I'm Aaron.
And this is P-Car Talk.
Yep.
All right. Welcome to another episode of P-Car Talk. I'm Mike.
And I'm Aaron.
Special guest, Chris Villasenor on the show.
Look at that. First time.
Exactly. Our gracious host also, while we're in North Carolina, we are very appreciative to you for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and also JRZ rep too. So we're going to get into Chris's history. He's a Porsche enthusiast. We're going to talk a little bit about his background with Porsche, growing up with Porsche, some of the cars he's owned over time.
And then we're gonna,
and then transition into some JRZ conversation at the end that he's allowed to divulge and share. So it's going to be an interesting talk, right? So we're excited. So let's go ahead and rewind all the way back, because I've seen these lovely pictures you guys have in here in your garage, and you've told me many stories, and I know it's going to be repetitive for us, but not our listeners. Tell us a little bit about that, because you got a really cool picture of your mom in an old long hood 911, and then you got a picture of a speedster being towed around behind a wagon and stuff like that. And you grew up in SoCal, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the early years for sure.
Yeah. So let's elaborate a little bit on that, your exposure to Porsche at a young age.
Well, my parents grew up in Santa Barbara, and really the whole time as growing up and being young, I would hear the stories, from Dad and even my mom about the cars he had. And it'll literally be the day he's dying. He'll be like, I should have never sold that. Yeah. So he had a couple of 356, including the Speedster that you saw, including one with a twin cam Carrera motor.
Man, like the Holy Grail, right?
Yeah, when it didn't mean the same.
Yeah.
And, that picture is him, with the Buick wagon, towing it, doing a essentially what we would call a track day now.
Yeah.
And they would just go out to Riverside and places like that, or even drive the cars out there, and you just wouldn't think about doing that now with that. And then the other picture was a little bit later. They had married by then, and that 69, I think is what that was.
Yeah.
Not in 69, but it was in 69.
Yeah.
And so it would have been late 71. That's my mom doing a gymkhana at Point Magoo in California, and she was 5 months pregnant with me. And
How cool is that?
And still beat my dad.
That's so awesome.
The same weekend.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
It's just been a bit of it's always Porsche's
so
always
she had more weight, because of you in the stomach, right?
Yeah, and she was honestly just kind of a bigger badass, and pretty fearless, pretty rad woman, and so that's always stuck with me. The stories were always there. Dad would take me to races, talk about it. He was the kind of guy that you could point at any car on the road and you're like, what's that? And he would tell you.
Yeah.
And always into the brand. And so finally later, that was one of the first cars I got. And again, back in California for college in Santa Barbara. And I got a 74 2-liter 914. And it's just sort of always been.
Yeah.
It'll never go away.
Yeah, I guess when you're kind of like living inside your mama's belly and she's driving a 911, maybe that's like osmosis somehow,
it's a pretty big organic
just
story.
It feels pretty legit. Aside from being born in one, I think that's pretty close.
Exactly. Or you hear those origin stories. Oh, I rode home in a 911. You're like, okay, well, I was actually riding home. I was still inside.
I was racing in a 911.
I was technically like tow weight at that point.
Yeah.
But I mean, that must have been pretty rare too. Obviously, you weren't like alive at that time. But did you ever get to have conversations with your mom? Obviously, after you were born and you were talking about cars a little bit, it must have been pretty rare for her, even during that time. Because even nowadays, I mean, there are women in Porsche and stuff like that, but there's still not that many. So I couldn't imagine how she must have been an ostrich back then. There was nobody probably like doing that, woman-wise at least.
Yeah. No, like I said, she was pretty fearless. And I think if it was something that she's standing around and she's watching all the guys do, she was kind of like, I can do that. And probably faster, and that's exactly what she did. And even a little bit later, we'd go to the dunes, and she would drive one of those Jimmys, a 75. And she, no problem, competition hill, didn't care who it was, and had no experience doing it, and was just, ready to dive in and go. And that was pretty awesome.
If you know it, how did they get into Porsche? Because I always find that to be interesting as well, because you think about it in that time, like you said, they're kind of racing, they're doing what modern day people are doing with more modern cars, but they were doing it back then, like early 70s and stuff like that with these vehicles, and let's be real, there wasn't the communication there is now. So it's like you had to be exposed to it somehow to have some type of like, how do I do this? You know, because I couldn't imagine, like, my father didn't know anybody who did stuff like that. He wasn't a car guy, so
well, I think if you were
no influence,
if you were a SoCal car guy,
so do you think it was
in the 50s and 60s?
So do you think it was more geographic, like where they were, and they were seeing a lot more people?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, that
you know,
makes
like he would go
sense
to Vasek Polak and all the places.
Yeah.
So I think it was, you know, he was seeing Porsches around the way that, I don't know if you're a kid growing up in Detroit or, you know.
Yeah. Where the muscle cars, or
yeah,
maybe
or
like in
just
the
whatever's,
South where there was a lot of muscle cars. Or
yeah,
something
exactly.
Like that.
So I think it was sort of a natural thing. You see it around and wanted it to.
Yeah, so maybe proximity because of the geographic region they grew up in. Okay, well, that makes sense.
And think about the tracks are close by at that time, you know, and it was a way easier thing to do. And you had the mountains there, and it was just.
And then back before Mulholland is obviously like a traffic jam like it is now, but back in the day, people used to go out there and like race.
And it was very James Dean. It was very this. It was, you know, so it was
sense.
cool back then. And I think Dad was trying to be cool.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I mean, they were cool, and I don't think they were trying to be cool. They were, if they were, you know, speedster and, you know, not long hood, that is cool. Thank you for sharing that, because that's a unique story. It's always good to hear someone's origin story, and that is a lot more sexier story than I have or Aaron has. So, I mean, that's a really cool story. So you did mention having a 914 when you were in college, and you've owned several of them, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the 914 a little bit, since I don't want to like use the term expert, but you've owned enough so you understand them a lot more than maybe Aaron and I do, at least. And we have talked about them on the show before. But let's talk to somebody who's owned a few of them. Why did you like them? Why did you gravitate towards them?
Why'd you keep buying them?
Yeah. What kept you? What kept you?
Why?
Yeah. Why did you keep? Well, I mean, from a curiosity standpoint, because there's a lot of listeners too that may be first-time buyers, and you know, it helps. Maybe they don't know anybody who's ever owned one, and maybe if you tell some testimonial stuff, they're like, "Oh yeah, I can relate to what he's saying. Like, I actually maybe this is a car for me, and I don't need to have that."
No, I think it's a really good example of an evolution that happened that wasn't necessarily the vehicle evolving itself. You know, there wasn't 5 generations of it. You know, at that time, when I had it in the, you know, in 1990, they were in Southern California. It was your cheapest way in, and they were affordable for an 18-year-old, you know, who had a Volkswagen, or had been around that. And I kind of just lucked into it, and it checked all the boxes. And back then, it was, you know, relatively reliable at that point, and, you know, not rusty and whatnot. And now that, you know, that car would be worth a lot more, but I had the best time driving around the hills in Santa Barbara, and I wasn't even really doing Porsche scene stuff. You know, I was just a kid trying to go to college.
Yeah, do the normal day stuff, right?
Yeah, and I drove it everywhere for everything, and had the best time. And I think that sort of cemented that for me, because the memories of driving in a beautiful area with perfect weather, the top off all the time.
I was going to say, it probably was pretty rad to be cruising that around and be young, and you probably, those memories, like we talked about on a previous show with a different person, you hang on to those memories of like such good times, right?
Yeah, no, I felt like $1 million then. And then once I did start to learn a little bit more about, you know, 6-cylinder swaps and about the wide body and about its a little bit more of its history. And then, you know, then I found a 73, you know, 2-liter that had been flared and painted and whatnot. And so I, you know, sold the other car and got that and you know, had that for a while until you sort of just kind of run out of money for college. And
Exactly. You're like, I'm capped.
You know,
I'm capped, bro.
And then I think the same story that happens to a lot of us, you know, then there was the gap. You know, you don't have your Porsche for a long time, but you always wish that you did. And then by then I was actually working in industry and around all these. Now Porsches are getting really expensive and this and that. And then, you know, I had a chance to dive back in, and I found a signal orange, you know, 74 1.8 that with the brown interior. And I was like, that's what I wanted. And the same deal, just had a great time driving that around.
Nice.
And then you're kind of stuck. And then you become the 914 proponent. So then you start listing off, well, it's lightweight, it's mid-engine, it's this, it's affordable.
You're the advocate for the car.
You know,
now,
you're
right?
that guy, you know, and you're like, you don't have to have a 911, you can have this. And if you get a chance to drive a nice one, it is really rewarding. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
yeah, especially if you don't start thinking about horsepower. But again, also a sorted one with a motor swap is amazing to drive.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and there'll be, of course,
Always
there's
have
going
a
to be another
special-
one,
yeah,
at some
always
point.
special place in your heart for 'em.
Yeah, and you guys got to say the last one.
Yeah,
you
I
know?
rode in that one, and I was gonna like piggyback onto what you were saying. I never drove one, but I never even rode in one until I rode in yours, and I was blown away about how intimate the feeling is. Meaning, like, I'm not using that word negatively. I mean, in a good way, where everybody uses a cliche phrase, it's very go-kart-esque or whatever, but it really does feel that you're really close to the road, really good visibility. The car handles, literally, cliche term, on rails, and like you said, you don't even have to be going fast to have a good time because there's not a lot separating you from the road. So imagine riding in a go-kart that maybe is just a tube chassis frame with nothing around it. Basically take one step further and put some glass and doors on it. That's kind of what that felt like. And I was like, man, this feels intense, but we're only going like 60 miles an hour. Yeah,
and it is still very Porsche. I think that's the other thing in the early days. There's that lot of talk about it's a Volkswagen, it's a this, and the reality is it's incredibly Porsche.
So in Southern California, you were in 18, you were dealing with that. So you have a lot more to speak on than maybe even more recent owners, even somebody who's owned for 10 years. Like, we're talking back to 1990, right? So we're talking some time. Did you experience any of the ostracization of people saying, like, and I know you weren't really like saying you were in the big Porsche scene, it was more of your daily driver, you were hanging out, but did you ever encounter any of that anywhere in Southern California, or be like, oh fuck, like that's not a Porsche? Get out of here,
definitely
dude.
in subtler ways. No matter what, it was just not a 911.
Okay.
And wasn't going to be, or a 928
Yeah.
even.
Experience 914 racism, essentially. Like, I'm using that in air quotes right now.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go to that extreme, but I mean, there was a reason why they were affordable, and by that I mean really inexpensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of that, but I think it was maybe a little easier there because I just got done saying it's not a Volkswagen, but at the same time, because Volkswagen culture was so big, then it always has been and still is.
Yeah.
It was very much an easier transition, and you still kind of were in that world. It wasn't like immediately I was trying to show up at some concours and trying to be at that level. But I think the people who are into Porsches and into driving Porsches, kind of how we are now. The ones that were like that then, I think were very like they got it, and they admitted, hey, that's a great car. A 2-liter 914 at the time would outhandle a 930 in a tight course. So they got it and they knew it. I think it was the people who were sort of into the brand or more into the show car, into the collection or whatever, it wasn't. Whereas now it's a whole different thing. Finally, in the last however long, it kind of came back.
Kind of getting its due, maybe, essentially. Because I'm glad I wanted to dive into that history because you actually lived it, because you're the first person we ever known and owned them that long. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean it like you actually have firsthand testimonial from it to say, like, yes, it was this way, and not saying just because you didn't experience it, it wasn't happening to other people. But I just wanted to hear that, because we hear that a lot of times where people, discredit it as being a Porsche. Oh, that's not a real Porsche. Even like when we've talked about in other episodes with 944s, people discredit that car. Well, that's a transaxle car. That's not like a real Porsche. I disagree with all of those things.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a Porsche.
Just different
it's
flavor.
just, I was going to say it just does different things, right? It's not the classic 911, but it's still a Porsche.
Yeah.
And I actually really enjoyed obviously you've enjoyed many 914s, but I enjoyed that short ride that I did take with you back from Sonderworks when we came in the car, and I'm like, man, I was actually pretty impressed by the car. I was like, wow, it opened my eyes up a lot. And that's when I was kind of pushing you, Aaron, saying like, you should really consider one of these. That was when you were kind of really shopping and air cooled, and you still had your 997, and you were like, okay, I might do this, and you're like, oh, I can't do it. Like, the front and the back look the same. I can't do it.
Oddly enough, I think that's one of the things I kind of like about it. I've gotten to really appreciate its proportions, and there's a whole new generation of owners now, both older and younger. Younger, it's an entryway into air cooled, and then older who have no problem buying, 911 or several for that matter, but they also get it, and now they've had a great experience, or they might have another air cooled or this. And there's some really nice cars out there that are a lot of fun to drive and are getting, really getting used. And that's, I think, is great.
I think one of the unique things I want you to elaborate on the last 914 you had that you sold, because you work for JRZ, so I want to kind of tie that in a way. You put JRZ coilover suspension on that vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Explain that process. How difficult and challenging was it, or was it not? And what did it do for you? You had the car beforehand. What did it feel like beforehand? What did it feel afterwards? Like, let's talk about that, because I'm sure there's a lot of 914 listeners that maybe have torsion bar and they're kind of like, well, I'd be interested in doing this. Like, what's it goes into it?
I think the reality is it's probably as easy or even easier, or as easy or easier than doing it in your your pre 964 air cooled. In that we've been doing coilover conversions in the front of 911s for forever, and essentially, the front end is basically 911 with a few differences.
Yeah.
So it was fairly straightforward in that way. It does require either modifying, your stock spindle, or sending a donor one or something, and it's pretty straightforward from the do. And when they're done, it's a really nice piece. It's remachined and replated and re-welded, and you can change geometry and such. Again, very classic things that we've been doing to 911 since the beginning. And then the rear at a 914 already is coilover, so it's pretty straightforward to do with that. That's why I mean it's actually a little easier. And it was pretty, well, I dare say transformative. But 914s are pretty good out of the box when they're sorted, as is a 911.
Yeah.
But it was that same thing. Now you just made it even more capable. And with that particular set of dampers, that RS Pro 3, now I had that sort of, I could do it all. I didn't have to make, super soft street car, and I didn't have to make a super stiff, tough to drive track car. I could kind of have both and really dial it in, because the 914 is stiff and light. And it was a lot of blast. A lot of blast. It was a lot of fun to do on those events that we did with it.
Yeah. So obviously this is a stupid question, but I kind of want you to answer it in your own way with a little bit of background behind it. So taking it from where it was when you first had it, and then where it ended up, obviously we know it's an improvement. That goes without speaking, but did it just feel so much tighter? What was the rebound like? Was it just, did it give you so much more confidence in the corners compared to what it was before that? Or was it actually not significantly different? Like, what would you say there?
Well, I would say with this particular car, because everything was definitely a little tired. A lot of dry rubber bits and bushings and such. It was pretty dramatic how much better the car felt, and all of a sudden you felt like you could point and shoot at anything. A rough reference, like doing the Ruckus in it or doing Target Carolina in it. Any tight corner, you could just attack it, and it was so much fun.
Okay.
Super confidence inspiring in that way.
Somebody who's maybe, take me for example, say I'm shopping a 914, and obviously we can get into the weeds of it, but give me the cliff notes for listeners and myself if I'm shopping one. Like, what do I need to look out for if I'm going to look at a car that maybe is, I see on Facebook Marketplace, or maybe the guy down the road has one and I want to buy it. What should I be looking out for? Like, maybe point out rust spots or some bugaboos with the car. What are some of the things that you've experienced after owning 4 of them over such a long span? What have you learned that are pain points, and what have you learned that aren't that big a deal? Because, obviously there's the forum keyboard people that are saying, this is what you need to watch out for. This is what you need to watch out for. But from you, since you lived it and you've owned 4 of them, what do you really need to look out for on those things?
I mean, absolutely rust. Rust is the
just kind of everywhere, or what?
I mean, yes, to some extent. You've probably heard people talk about the hellhole, and that's just with the way they did the engine lid and everything there. It would allow water to drain down through, and it would go over the battery. The battery would drip kind of acid down there, and then it would just underneath in a very hidden spot. It would just all stew, for lack of a more technical way to put it.
All that away.
Yeah, and it would just, and then it would get down into the longs, which are that lower part of the unibody there, and really weaken the car. But they were susceptible to anywhere they could get water, which was all over the car. Is certainly susceptible. They weren't galvanized,
so they were plagued coming like all those early cars kind of were, where they weren't galvanized. It's like basically do your homework and really look at the car.
Yeah. So rust is the biggest thing, because the reality is most of the mechanicals can be fixed and redone and rewired and this. And it's, if you can find one that's not rusty, then the rest is fairly straightforward.
Is there a lot of patchwork, almost kind of like Beetles, where the floor pans, do they get rusty and then you see patchwork under the panels?
Exactly, you can. So yeah, so getting back to what you're talking about, doing your due diligence is obviously looking for rust, looking for repair work, looking for shoddy work. I think is sort of the biggest thing,
because of, like you said, they were really cheap back then. So maybe even if they were already rusting in the 90s, people were probably doing the gum fix to it to get it through for a couple of years, because they know that's not there forever.
Yeah, crazy weird,
i.e. college kid car.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Weird fixes, Bondo in place you didn't expect, really bad welds and things. And then probably after that, from the motor standpoint, the biggest thing is you'll see a lot of carburetor and single carb conversions. All 914s were fuel injected.
Okay.
And are significantly better with it. But a lot of
and is that CIS that's in it, or
no? Well, they have a couple of different kinds of. There was a L Jetronic and a J Jetronic.
Okay.
And which actually work really well, but a lot of those are very vacuum dependent, and especially like the 1.8 I mentioned. There's vacuum lines everywhere, and what would happen is you'd get these sort of amateur mechanics or the local tire shop or whatever, and the car's not running right, and they don't know how to take care of it.
Got it.
And then they went out putting some single carburetor on there and try
Fixed.
to get. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's
you're
just,
like, it runs even worse.
yeah, no, in a lot of ways it does, because if you're going to build a carburetor motor for that, it needs to have the proper cam and this, and they really need to be built right. And those who do build them right, you can have some amazing Type 4 performance. But to me, the absolute best one is always going to be a stock injected one, unless it's a purpose built.
Got it.
Full
yeah, unless
motor.
you've like taken it somewhere and really got somebody like to do some like massive work on it.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, because I mean, I figured we might as well hear it from somebody who's lived it and stuff like that, because I can't speak to it. I mean, I can read a bunch about it, but it just sounds better coming from somebody who's like, I've done it. They're cool, but these are the problems, or these are the issues with them. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, as time manifests, right, while you had that 914, you still kind of have it, but it kind of don't have it. So 991, right? You had a 991 911 PDK car. Tell us about that leap and bound. Obviously, there's a lot of different technology, a lot of different changes from there to there. What are some of the things that you liked about that car, and what are some of the things you didn't like? Because you and I have talked a little bit offline of some of the things you're like, well, I didn't kind of like this part about it, but I did like these things about it. So why don't you share some of that with the people?
Yeah, I mean, that really was obviously a big change. I mean, I've been around all the water cooled stuff just from work over the years, but this was the first one that I owned. And I don't think you realize, unless you've been around all the water cooled generations and owned them, just how good they are at being cars, in the sense that you could daily drive it, you can do everything with it. And
you were road tripping with yours too.
Yeah,
right?
and it did everything perfectly well. Driving around town, super easy to drive. It's not temperamental. It's not peaky. It's not angry. And then, I drove it all the way down to Miami from here for DRT. Yeah. And then the very next day did a track day with it, which is where it really came into its own. Like even that base C2 was just absolutely amazing to drive on the track. And then drove home, mountains, whatever. But it's, I'll be honest with you, it was a little boring until you were looking, like it did the normal stuff so good.
Yeah.
But
you felt it when you had it. It wasn't really that exciting, right? Like, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, which it sounds terrible to say about it. But
I mean,
it was totally true.
I want your honest feedback with it. Like, it's okay it's not terrible to say, because I think there's also people maybe out there thinking maybe a modern car is the one I want. Maybe that's what I want to get. And it's good to hear somebody who has actually owned one. And you're like, it was cool, but it really, after, the newness of it and having it kind of lost its luster, right? Maybe for you?
Well, and I think also coming from having air-cooled stuff and other vintage cars and whatnot, that it was, like I said, it was so good at doing.
I was about to say, is it fair to say it was like it was too good at doing its job? It was like
100%.
uneventful.
Yeah, now I can understand. I can also understand now why guys get turbos and cars like that, because you can have a car with that much power, that much whatever, but yet it's so easy to drive.
Yeah,
like your grandma could get in it and drive to the market, and it would be okay.
Yeah. So it's fair to say new car owners aren't that good at drivers. No, I'm just kidding.
100%.
Shots fired.
Yeah, exactly.
Shots fired. No, I'm just
And not
totally,
by Chris.
Yeah, totally joking. Totally joking.
No, it was,
you
I
see me, I'm
really-
trying to pit him against everybody.
Yeah, no, what it did was make me realize what I wanted in a water cooled, or what I needed, because I didn't know yet.
Yeah.
Right. And I made those mods to it, and it made it a fantastic.
JRZs on it
Yeah,
as well.
I had JRZs on it, and it absolutely proved the point of what, we're sort of preaching about what you can do with that, and some wheels and tires, and it was amazing. But also, when you're privy to a lot of stuff, so it's like, you're kind of ready for the bigger, better, faster, more. Or, if I was going to go more track focused with it, it might be better with this model. Or if I was going to do this, it might be that. And also now not commuting anymore, then it became less sort of necessary.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking about those other things versus if I was commuting to my old office,
Yeah, maybe you'd still have it, right? Maybe
you're
it'd still
driving
be,
an hour each way. It would be absolutely perfect for that, actually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so it maybe still have a placeholder for you, but it kind of like way the world turned a little bit. It's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, I don't really need this anymore, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So then transitioning from that, like a more recent purchase, I would say in the last few months for me, you and I discussed it a lot before you purchased the car. You ended up getting a 3.2 Carrera, right? Like air-cooled car.
yeah, and that, I mean, I love my 914s, but that was always a target, whether it would be just that or in addition to. And I had in the past had an 84 3.2 Targa, which in hindsight now I realize how rough it was. But the point is I got a little taste of it, and sort of always knew.
Yeah. You had that savory fruit once, and you're just kind of like, I like the way that tastes.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, I was doing a lot of 911 things in my 914 with everybody else in their 911s.
Yeah, that's true.
And as great as it was, you're always, you need a little more to kind of keep up with the boys, and
well, especially at the paces that we're running, you're 100% right.
Yeah, and so I found this car through our mutual friends at Zweck, and it is, I'm absolutely in love with this car.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you bought it too, because you and I were talking, I want to say, what was it, maybe 6 or 7 months ago when I was here last, and we were kind of discussing, and you had told me about the car that was there, and you were telling me all about it, and it's a Euro car, it had sports seats, it had all this stuff, it's driver quality, it's not like a blue chip car, so you can drive it and you can hot rod it and all the stuff you want to do to it. And I'm like, what are you waiting for, man? Like, do that. You need to do that because that's who you are.
Yeah.
What are you waiting for?
I think sometimes you have to do something different to realize that that's the thing. And it's,
I'm so glad you bought it. I know you haven't had a ton of seat time in it. I know you've already done some things to it. Why don't you talk about a little bit of what that emotion's like? Because there's a lot of maybe first-time buyers also, even in the air-cooled world, that want to jump in. And even Aaron someday, an air-cooled 911 ownership, like that's on his radar, among many other people. Where people go like, well, maybe, I'm really scared to make that choice. Maybe just because I'll have buyer's remorse, or is it the right car for me? Clearly you don't feel that way. Like when you brought it home, you probably felt like right away, you're like, yes, I'm so glad I bought this.
I think 5 minutes on the road after, because I drove it back from Miami, and, it was nice again, knowing the people I do in the industry, and then the friends that we have, and just our kind of Porsche community that knew what to expect a little bit. And then having those trusted friends, like Allison Neal there and Charles up here, and you can really sort of vet it all out ahead of time and know you're doing the right thing. But until I got in the car and I got all sorted and I got on the highway the first time, and I was like 100%
you felt at home.
Yeah, I just knew it was the right thing, and drove it all the way back here from Miami and sort of really got to know it, and it was a fantastic experience.
Talk about, from your perspective, what are some of the nuances or the differences you noticed maybe right away in early ownership? That way you haven't had a lot of time between, obviously, the obvious with the 914 and the 911. I mean, really, with engine placement, horsepower, those are all the obvious. But I meant like maybe tactile feels, like the way the car feels when you're driving it. What are some of the significant differences you noticed as a driver there?
I mean, it's definitely, it's a solid, thought out, real car. And I don't mean like the 914's not, but I mean, it's, you've got quite a, whole decade in between the generation. Well, obviously 911 goes way back, but that 3.2 Carrera, and SC before it, like it was very developed by then, and it works really well. And so it was immediately confidence inspiring, and fast without being too fast, and with a stock motor, and it helped being Euro. So it's got a little more ponies, but, everything just felt right. Everything that you touch feels right. Everything is in a thought out spot.
It's almost like a build quality type of situation where everybody always does say, because it's a true thing, where they keep evolving the 911. You felt that you had a piece of sculpture that was continuing to get evolved, correct?
Yeah. It was, it wasn't like you're driving, a piece of museum art. It was just wonderfully purposeful.
Yeah. More of an instrument, right?
But it still was beautiful. It had purpose. It was designed, with a thoughtful artistic eye. It wasn't so, so industrial and whatever that it was, was boring by any means. But, and I think also if you're a certain vintage like me, it sort of represented everything in your youth.
That you've always kind of wanted.
This was the car on the poster.
Yeah.
And it, it really meant, it still does a lot.
How long did it take you to stop smiling the first day after you got it? Was your face hurting while you were just kind of driving it? I just remember my first day when I drove it home, like I had an 8-hour drive and I was just literally like,
it was like that until I hit
big,
the big
animal
storm
hanging out the window or something.
I had a really scary storm I had to drive into, and that was a little terrifying. But what I really remember was I was so exhausted after dealing with that when I don't even remember where I stayed in a hotel on the highway, and when I came back down the next morning to the rest drive, and the sun was out and it was beautiful, and
this is my car.
Yeah, I had that feeling of looking at my car in the parking lot in the sea of just silver, exactly. Cars, and there was my red 3.2 just sitting there in the perfect parking spot, and
the automotive junk that's just sitting out there, and then you have your Jewel. It's just kind of like,
I'm not gonna lie, it felt pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, yes, box checked.
Yeah, the rest of the drive was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I bet. And then since then, you've done some stuff. You've done suspension work already on it. You've had the engine kind of tuned, I guess, the best way, tuned up essentially, I should say.
Yeah.
And then you've done different wheels and tires and exhaust. But the big difference, right? I think you even said it. Wow, I can tell the difference just changing tires too. Where the confidence inspiring with tires.
Yeah, just all the sum of all the small things, and it was so great driving home, like we talked about, but now it's like developing its personality.
Yeah.
And, making these mods, it's the same stuff we all do, but getting to experience it myself. It just, everything we do, I get done to it, it just gets better.
Yeah.
And, and we're not even done yet. Just laying that base work for suspension for, obviously I'm going to put JRZs in it.
Yeah.
It's going in.
I never thought that was going to happen.
Yeah. But setting everything up as far as the, just replacing all the worn stuff. The car was in really good condition, but it's, it was just imperfect enough to be perfect.
Yeah.
And just bringing it up to spec, getting the exhaust on, replacing,
which is pretty commonplace.
Yeah, and replacing, some stuff that needed with brake lines and things, and a bunch of the kind of rubber bits, and you realize that it was getting some vacuum leaks here and there, and Charlie did a really good job on getting that sorted, and then I got in the car and it was like a whole different experience, and that's what's lovely about these cars, and that if you get 20 horsepower back.
Yeah. I mean, it's momentous.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's huge. And now it revs great. And it's so much fun to drive, and it sounds great. And, did the numeric shifter, and now it's just such a joy to drive.
Nice.
And yes, sticky, stiff tires were.
Oh, yeah. Well, confidence inspiring all the time. So, yeah, I'm so happy that you finally bought that car, too. And because I know I've known you before that car, and now I obviously still know you. But it was just nice to see somebody that you're good friends with transition to that, because he's always wanted that 911 and he always wanted that car. And actually this car worked out really great because it was really the Goldilocks car for you, because it wasn't so nice that you couldn't hot rod it. And, it wasn't so clapped out that you didn't want it. So it was it was just that perfect car that we're all kind of looking for, in a way of all right, this is my car. So yeah, I love it, and I love the way it looks. It looks great with the gold campos on it, man.
I do come out to the garage and it just will sometimes.
Yeah.
You start thinking of
look what I've done.
Yeah. Do I need something from the store? Yes, I do.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, let's make a run.
Yeah.
And plus, like we talked about before, starting to get really nice out. It's going to be, especially for you guys, you're going to be driving a lot more, and you're like, yes, this is why I have you.
It's going to see a lot of miles this month.
Yeah.
We got a lot going on.
Yeah. There's a lot of drives.
Yeah.
But like, that's what they're for, man.
Yeah.
That's what it's for.
It's nice to be able to do that without fear.
Yeah.
I mean, anything can happen, obviously, and
of course,
and they're old cars and they'll do stuff, but at the same time, you can plan to do this kind of miles in it, and it loves it.
Yeah, compared to maybe something like similar vintage, you'd be like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to like really leave the city because I might not make it back.
Yeah, they're just so robust and reliable. And we have a strong enough community too that with anything that comes up, there's somebody to help you.
Which is super great. And that is, I think that goes without being said enough, where maybe if you were on some coast to coast road trip, there really is somebody in any major city who's kind of like, we're friends of friends, or somebody's friends with them, to say like, hey man, I'm like broke down. Can you like at least kind of park my car in your driveway or something until something comes and picks it up? They're like, oh yeah, sure, man, no worries. Like, and that's the great thing about it too, right? Community. So let's transition a little bit. You work for JRZ. Why don't you say what you do for JRZ, and then we'll transition to some of the newer products, because I'm really excited about some of the stuff we talked about what JRZ is doing with their suspension. Yeah,
well, I'm the sales manager for the U.S. market. JRZ is a Dutch suspension company, been around in the way that it is now for 25 years, which means a lot. And its origin history goes even further back, and always been a big player in high-end suspension, in developing new technologies for that, in racing in particular, and then beyond racing. We've talked about a lot as well in off-road and rally and such. But in the U.S., most known for racing, definitely a lot of Porsche. I mean, that's, I'm going to say, maybe even bread and butter for them. And it's pretty exciting to be a part of them. I knew them for a long time before I started working, with them. So it was a real good move. Yeah,
absolutely. So now, obviously, they have all different levels of suspension. Most of it coilover suspension, and we talked about Overlander stuff, RS3 Pro, one of the suspensions, all that kind of stuff. So there's an adaptable suspension. Can you elaborate on that so I don't say anything incorrect there? So since you're the expert behind that, other than basically, I'll just say the tip of the iceberg, kind of the stuff we talked about, it being on the Gunther Works car, and it's an adaptable suspension that's on this super high-end car that your company supplies all of this like rad technology and stuff. Can you actually describe what that's really doing, and how can other people transform their cars to do something similar?
Yeah, this is some Ford technology that is really complementary to, JRZ's existing, kind of high-end, suspension systems, which are fantastic. And those quote unquote analog systems now will definitely outperform existing electronic technology that we see, whether it be, what's on Porsche or McLaren or, a Volkswagen GTI for that.
And you're
matter.
Referring to like the Pasm, like the active stuff or whatever. Okay.
And so what they've developed with SRI is a whole new valve technology, a complete departure from what we're used to seeing. And overcoming all of the negatives that, I'll be honest, even I didn't really think about existing, meaning the speed of the valves, how sensitive they are to heat and hysteresis, and how fast they can go. And I think that was one of the biggest things, of the electronics part, meaning the computer brain and whatnot, that can all work really fast. But the actual valves in those active dampers,
the mechanical piece of
it,
it's not reacting quick enough.
Correct. To the point where you could hit a chicane and really nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Or they could be reactive to driver inputs, but not necessarily reactive to what's happening in the road. So it could react to you swerving the wheel, but not necessarily you hitting the bumper on the track, hitting the curbing, for example. And this new technology really allows that to happen.
Yeah.
It's simple, it's light, it's robust.
Happening in milliseconds type of deal.
Yeah. And there's many levels of that to come. And you saw a couple of extremes in it, like with BBI and the Pikes Peak cars, where we had really the full complete system. You had the dampers with that new valve technology and those sensors in there. You had a VCU or valve control unit that was sort of the brain of that. Then you had and also has sensors in that.
Okay.
Then you had an additional array of sensors, and then both on the unsprung and unsprung mass, because then it starts pulling into not just what the chassis is doing, but what the tires are doing and everything really working together, and then a very advanced algorithm that you would need the engineers to do a much better job explaining to myself. So really have the most capable suspension system on a car possible.
Okay.
And then on the Gunther Works car, it's dampers and a box. And now we have the most advanced road setup. And you've heard kind of some of the reports have been fantastic with that. And those chassis have really been well sorted on JRZs now for a while anyway, and they're really known for their amazing road manners and handling, both on the track and the street. And then what you'll see coming soon will be a plug-and-play system. So now our Pasm Dampers, which have been around since 997, and we think about the volumes of 991s and 981s and how many Pasm cars are out there. So a couple of things. One, a lot of those are due for replacement, and there's not very good options. Or I shouldn't say
You mean just the Pasm system itself?
Not much better damper replacement options. And now with these, we can have a substantially more advanced actual shock that can talk to the car. So now you can still use your buttons and your settings in the car. And now instead of the sport or street being either way too soft or way too hard, now you can have a truly sort of active system that's comfortable, truly sporty. Honestly, it's the way that we all wish our cars were all the time anyway, and why we do make upgrades like to a JRZ RS Pro 3. Now you can have that in kind of a plug-and-play scenario, which is really going to be fantastic.
So like in my 997, the GT3, so that Pasm system, so what you're saying is you would take that system that already kind of exists, take that out of the car, and replace it with the dampening system that JRZ's created, and now it's active. Now with that, does it have its own brain? Is that how it's doing its thing, or how does that
not
work?
in the plug and play?
Okay.
Versus a standalone system like we saw in the.
So the other stuff you were talking about that has its own brain,
correct?
But the plug and play, is that going to be as responsive, or is that going to run on a program? Meaning, like it always has preset settings. Is that what that's going to be?
Well, it communicates with the factory Pasm brain, if you will. So you're going to take your front strut out and your shock, unplug it, put this new one in, and plug it into that factory harness there, just as if you were doing an R&R in your stock one. But now the actual hardware damper, that valve inside, works substantially better.
Got it.
And ultimately, compared to that very elaborate standalone system in the BBI race car, you have limitations of the stock Pasm brain, but your performance will be substantially better. It's the easiest way for all of us to get a truly better experience.
Got it.
In that car affordably.
So because of the actual mechanical system of it is what we're really replacing, but it's still going to run off of the factory Pasm brain in the plug and play system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that understood that too.
Which I think for a lot of us is going to be.
That'd be a significant upgrade.
It's going to be what we need.
Yeah, it's going to be a significant upgrade just over that, just because, like you said, the mechanic. And let's be honest, if the car's an 07, which mine's at, that's 14 years old, that's probably tired anyways. So it's probably time.
It is absolutely is.
So it's just the replacement of that alone. Even if you went with an OEM replacement, it'd probably feel better, but it's probably going to feel substantially better using something that's tuned like a JRZ, right? Yeah,
if you're an enthusiast, you're going to love it because you have that increased performance we're all looking for. And if you're looking for something that's an OE level replacement, you're now at a similar cost for a better, a much better setup.
And you're getting a better product for it too, right?
And then when we get to the stainless system,
put me down for one of those.
Yeah, you also you have an app that you can use to control various aspects of it. Like in the Gunther Works car, for example, and in a more extensive version of what we did in BBI as well.
And that's you're speaking to the one now where we're going back to the reverting, saying the one that has the brain, right?
Yeah, exactly. So a standalone system, you can make changes. In your not your program, I should say, but you can control how you want the damping. You can create your own kind of sport and comfort,
kind of your own custom.
Yeah,
map,
exactly.
right?
And you now have an amazing thing to go between street and track day, or street and mountains, or my daily commute over the bumpy freeway versus something else.
And that's still available even in, like, I know we have a plug and play you said you're developing for, or is developed, I should say, past tense, it's done, for the 997. But if I was one of those guys who had the means and I wanted to be ham on my car, I could put that one with the brain in it too, the fully adjustable.
Later you'll be able to do. In fact, I could even do it in that car.
Okay.
So
that's going to roll out. That's not out
yet.
Yeah,
that will come down the road, and
that's more kind of like race applications currently, or special kind of stuff like Gunther
you
Works.
would see it more in a special scenario.
Okay.
But also you think about those cars, they're completely being built from the ground up. So that's the perfect opportunity to be able to run wiring, to be able to integrate it into the car in a very seamless way. Or in the case of the race car, again, it's a very bare.
Well, I know there's a lot of guys that are like just as nuts as we are, that have way more means, that maybe even they have a 997 Cup car and they're like, hey, I want to upgrade my suspension. I want this standalone brain suspension to run in that car.
Yeah.
So you're saying eventually they're going to be able to do
Correct.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The phone's already ringing, but it's not. It's not
yeah,
ready.
Product's not ready for that.
For that kind of scale.
I mean, we're not going to quote you on this, so give a big big time frame, like. Just so people that are listening that are truly interested in that, maybe they don't start blowing you up right away. Is there a time frame? Like, are we talking fall of 2022 maybe? Like,
no, I think for plug and play, I think you'll see some pretty close to production probably this year.
Okay.
And we'll see. Always afraid to commit
No,
to
I don't want to commit your engineers to anything, but maybe for the other guys that want to go
but
ham.
plug and play for sure we'll see.
And then the standalone, maybe a year from now, 2 years from now?
No, I think actually less from that. I think globally there's a lot of things to deal with from a supply chain standpoint. That might slow that up.
Okay.
Because a lot of that work is done, and now it's a lot of just small details, so that it is a very much an OE style integration and very easy to do. Versus a car that's being built from the ground up, where it's a little easier to integrate that. But in theory, like I said, I could take something like my 3.2 and strip out some interior, which is really not that hard to do in that car, and set something up like that.
That would be pretty.
So
rad.
who knows?
That would be pretty rad.
Maybe Foreign in 2022 could have fully active.
That would be pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like to think about that, because I'm thinking about how that can transform a lot of vintage cars.
Yeah.
In the coming future, when people maybe have that money and they're like, I'm really in love with this car, but man, it'd be so cool to have like not a race ride all the time.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And
or perfectly adaptable to whatever is happening at that time. The weather conditions, the tires I'm running.
Because I'm thinking about even, obviously modern cars are different, the way they develop them, but like where I'm thinking about like old school stuff, like we like to drive and all that, like how that can really transform maybe something like that.
Yeah. On some test vehicles, it's done absolutely exactly that.
Yeah.
It's
kind of like, this feels like a modern 911 now.
And even to again reference back to that Gunther Works, which is a street car. That car was really good before.
Yeah.
I mean, really good. They did an amazing job with the JRZ setup that was on there, and now with the active setup, it was
unreal.
Yeah, even better, and also just kind of how seamless it was, or how easy it was to go boop, and have a truly active, adaptive setup that you could easily set up for each driver if you wanted, for that matter. But it's so adaptable that the three of us could hop in at different times, and drive the way we like, each individual
and
like to drive,
something different each time.
We would all come out going, that was amazing.
Yeah, even though it felt different for each one of us, we'd be like,
we want different things. We're sensitive to different things, and I think that's the kind of thing that really has me excited, even for the most, I don't want to say entry level driver, but the guy who's just, the owner who is not chasing lap times, but just wants an enjoyable experience.
And to be fair, like I'll throw myself on the sword. I know my car well enough, but just because I think I know the car, I don't know the car well enough maybe to like a race car driver does. And he's like, well, I want this to be tighter. I want this to be looser. But if you have a brain that's kind of doing that, and it's just reacting to the road, and it's reacting to whatever G's you're pulling or whatever you're doing in the corners and all that kind of stuff, it takes a lot of that maybe miscommunication or lack of communication from that driver to their suspension guy or gal who's doing their suspension, to be like, man, my coilover system's like this. We need to like get a tighter spring, or we need to maybe like loosen it up some. It takes all that guesswork out now, right?
Yeah. And then I mean, at a higher level, when we talk about all those, the sensor array and all this stuff happening, that it's, now imagine a race car, you've got a tire going low. Our fuel level is going low.
Yeah.
You've got a wing plane that's broken. You can adjust for all these things and to try to keep it the best handling package possible.
Give you the best that you can
so they
for
can
what
get
you
back
have.
to the, without it being completely disabling to the car. Or an ideal sense at Pikes, a dramatic change in weather, a dramatic change in this. From a commercial standpoint, imagine a loaded truck now.
Yeah.
The shifting loads and things. I'm just excited for overlanding capabilities of what it can do
That's
for
cool
that
too, yeah.
as well. There's so much that this technology is capable of doing that's beyond just what we think for sports cars.
It sounds like you guys are going to be
excited.
very busy with a lot of orders very soon, because I can imagine that from an overlanding standpoint, even every aspect, anybody who has something, that they're enthusiastic about, this makes sense for.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No,
if
absolutely.
you guys need me, just give me a shout. I can probably be another rep for you guys. No, I mean, I'm probably going to work with Chris. It's just like, he's like, look, I need an assistant or something. Like, you need to answer all these phone calls for me. I'll be like, okay. I was like, yeah, we don't have it. Bye. We don't have it. Bye. We don't have it. Bye.
Not yet.
Yeah. Not yet. Too early. Bye. Not yet. Too early. Bye. So he's like, that's all I need you to do.
Working on that.
That's all I need you to do right now.
Yeah. I had a question. So I know it's adaptive. Does it record any data and help you adjust to driving styles, or does it do any of that?
Yeah, in higher level packages, for lack of a better way to put it, yes, it can get more integrated in with your Motec system and your data acquisition, and the data guys can go nuts on just how much information. So it is capable of that at that level. I guess what I love the most is for all those situations that are not that, which is, most of it, the fact that, I don't need to do that, if you will.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it really is wonderful at both ends of that spectrum. So when it does come to a track car at that level where we can really manage, what that data means, absolutely.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. Let's close with this. So you represented JRZ at Pikes Peak Challenge. We've talked about Pikes Peak a lot on the show, so we won't go into what Pikes Peak is. If you don't know, just look it up. But I want you to actually, for better or worse, don't hold any punches back. And it's not like it would be a bad thing, but I actually want you to describe like the actual pain points of Pikes Peak, getting up at 1 a.m. and doing all that stuff. And then you being thrown into the blender when your engineers couldn't make it over because of COVID, and doing all this stuff, and you back and forth on the phone and working with Tim and his team, and basically you drinking from a fire hose because you're a sales guy. Not that you're not knowledgeable about the engineering side, but that's not your space, but you had to fill that space. So can you share that stuff with us so our listeners can hear how challenging that stuff can be?
Yeah, that was an amazingly terrifying experience. And, I had known Tim and some of the others for a really long time, doing Brembo all those years. And so there was no fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
I mean, he knows exactly what I do.
He's like, look here, SOB, I know what you're capable of, and you're going to have to really step up today.
No, actually, he said almost exactly those words. It was a little bit, there was intended to be, we put a lot of effort into putting together the two systems that were on those two cars. A lot of engineering time, a lot of money to put those together and get them sent over. And there was going to be, an additional staff of 3 to support these. It didn't get to happen.
Yeah, they were denied entry, right?
At the most political, they
couldn't fly in, basically, right?
Yeah, they could. Yeah,
because they're overseas, so that people don't understand. It's not like they're trying to fly from Tennessee to Colorado. These guys are overseas trying to get into our country.
Yeah, and it was very much a kind of a big political mess. But that's what it boiled down to.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, Chris, I guess you're you're it.
Your boots on ground, buddy. That's all we have.
Yeah. So there's,
He's
you know,
like,
me
"Yay
standing there
for
with,
being the only person in the U.S. to represent JRZ.
yeah. So they were, I'll be honest with you, considering everything that was going on and the newness of the system, they were amazing. And they were as helpful to me as I could have ever possibly been to them. All the guys there, they worked so hard on those cars for all kinds of things they had to deal with. And that's kind of what the mountain throws at you. And I think why they keep coming back for punishment every year, because it's really hard work. And even when the car is like perfect, it's still a lot of work, and it's such a weird schedule. It's unlike anything you would do in a normal race weekend, even a 24-hour race where you think it's the middle of the night, because it's a much smaller setup. You can't bring everything, right? You're literally on the side of a mountain during the practice days.
And they limit you. It's not for lack of wanting to. They just do not allow you to bring these huge rigs and all this stuff.
There's no space for it. So you're, they during that week before, they split up the mountain in 3 sections, and you practice on that at 3 a.m. So
exactly
because you have to be off the mountain by 9, because then they open up back up to regular tourists and things. So the schedule's weird. You know, you're up at, like I said, 1 a.m. You're on the mountain at 3. And try my best to be available, get the correct setup that they want, facilitate communication between our engineers who are stuck. Fortunately, with the time difference, 3 a.m. for us was kind of perfect for them.
Yeah, they were awake.
But then we would run into, you're also at 9 to 12 to whatever 1,000 feet with 0 reception. So trying to get that communication back, that was a challenge.
Sorry, you're breaking up. What? How many pounds?
Yeah.
Say that again. No. Oh, I lost him.
Yeah. So it was challenging on many levels for them, and it was really cool to be sort of, even though I was in the middle of it, it was still very much sort of observational as well, just watching them work. And it was pretty cool to be a part of it. The drivers were amazing. The cars were absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And you just don't realize how fast those cars are, especially Lucy.
Yeah.
Until you're there.
Because like camera footage really doesn't do it any justice.
No, it was even kind of, I think, turned down a little bit, you know, and they had a rad kind of engine management crew as well. Like, I mean, I think it was super pro level. It was really cool experience, and it was good also to see.
And you got to set up the suspension on that
the
car
suspension work.
And that, like, the reason why I bring that up is like I can't amount. I know you very well, like your personality. You must have literally like been so wound up because I just know you. Like just to give in a way, it's a good and bad thing. Chris really likes things the way he likes the things. So if there's like a wrench on the counter that's not supposed to be on there, he won't ask you. He'll just come behind you and put it away. Like, or if there's a napkin somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So I couldn't imagine him having to go and do this thing because he probably wants it to be perfect. But he's like, what the?
Yeah, you're also with a team of guys who are exactly that way. You know, each one of those techs are like, you know, don't touch my stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were super gracious about that as well. So you're trying really hard to stay out of the way, but do your job.
And you're doing it on award-winning car too. On top of it, it's not like some group of guys, and not to take anything away from guys. It's their first time up the mountain. They're not trying to be there because it takes a lot of times to dial a car in. Like they're there to set records and win. Yeah. So that car has already set records and won. Yeah. So every year they're expecting to win the championship and also set a record.
Yeah. This is not their first rodeo.
Exactly.
But it was a bigger show, you know, this year and a lot at stake.
Yeah.
And so I felt, it was me.
Like, no pressure.
He's like, I lost a little bit more hair there.
Yeah, you have no idea. Yeah, and you could see it on all their faces as well. Like they all had the same thought. But again, amazing car, amazing driver. It was a great opportunity to feel firsthand and see what the suspension is really capable of doing. And we learned a lot from that experience as well, as did they. So I think I'm more excited than ever for next year, you know, which is going to be the 100th running.
Yeah.
And
cool. That's what I was telling you. We need to go next year.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. And I think from a spectator standpoint, there is no other race like it. Now, on race day, if you hike up, you go up to a certain point to watch, like you're there all day. There is no coming down.
Yeah, I know.
And the cars race to the top and stay there until they come down, the procession at the end. But at the end, I was so ready to come home. I'm so ready to to crawl into a hole.
I was gonna say decompress.
Yeah. And now I can't wait.
I want my safe space.
Yeah, it was.
I need my stress pillow.
Yeah. But it was great to see what the suspension can do.
Yeah.
And now I would just wax poetic about what it's capable of doing.
Yeah.
Again, in the right hands with the right team who can really understand what's happening. These guys know how to set up a car, and now that they'll have some more opportunity to understand how to do it with this new technology, because it did change some ways of how they would do things. So they just needed to understand that, and without having the engineers there to help facilitate that, it was a real challenge. And I think then at the end, everybody's like, okay, I see this. This is actually a pretty elegant solution to X or to Y. And the fact that I could stand there at hot pit, if you will, or at the start, and they say, hey, we need a little this. And normally you would have to climb into the car and do this and try to click this and do that. I just had the tablet. I could go bloop and make a change that's immediate.
Sport mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, kind of. You could set different parameters.
Give us some more juice here.
Yeah, and then
Plus.
and then normally back at the shop, you could actually plug in a true tuning platform and make all kinds of programming changes at a real sort of elite level. It was an amazing stuff.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And also, I think it's really cool for you to share that too. The reason why I want to bring that up, it's why JRZ and other motorsports type places like JRZ sponsor big events like this, or cars that they believe in, because it's a lot of R&D for them to understand what the product that long term they're going to develop. So
does it work?
It almost kind of like the ethos that Porsche has with their race cars on track. They learn a lot from those cars, and those cars that makes their way into the 911 and the GT3s and all that kind of stuff, and kind of what you guys are doing. Everything daisy chains and connects. So I just kind of wanted to paint that picture for everybody. I mean, that's why these companies do stuff like this, so they can learn more and be better and their product better and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, there is racing is in the DNA of the company, just like it is with Porsche and certain tire companies and things like that. Like they're in it to win it.
Exactly.
And then the byproduct is also it helps the rest of the market as well.
Exactly. Because when you're doing it at that highest level, you're like, okay, how can we manufacture this down to the people who need it at just the normalcy?
Yeah, it's not just win on Sunday, sell on Monday.
Of course.
We want to win and win and win.
Of course.
And then sell some.
We'll sell
some products so we can continue to win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we can keep feeding that. It was it's a pretty amazing experience.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Do you have anything else for Chris?
I don't.
I think we've taken a lot of his time already, but awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for hosting us and just being a good friend, and man, just sharing some really good stuff and like your family history and all that kind of stuff. I am so glad I remember this. I almost forgot to do this one thing, and it is very, very important to me to not forget to do this. So stay tuned. We're not cutting yet. 356.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mare would rip my face off if we didn't talk about that, because actually love the story behind that. And her and I talked a little bit offline. Mare is Chris's wife, lovely wife. It's letting us stay here as well. And that's her 356 in the background, if you're watching, that she's been the caretaker for. And then Chris has been gracious enough, she's allowed him to drive it and kind of babysit it and be a caretaker for it. But I'm sure she would appreciate it if you kind of told the story of that car, because it has a very rich history. I've taken pictures of it, and the last time I was here, did a post on Instagram, man, this car has an awesome history. I'm not going to get into it, but do you mind sharing some of that? I think it's so good for everybody to hear something like that.
Yeah, no, that car means a lot to us because it's very representative of us in the sense that I had this, long kind of Porsche background and worked in the industry a long time and whatnot. And, when we first started talking, we chatted for a couple hours about stuff and things and what you did for a living and whatever. And then somehow the car came up, and it was like this immediate sort of kismet moment. And because, my dad had them, and that car was actually her father's. And he had it 20 some years before she got it. And it was something that he always wanted. And he's like, someday, because he came from nothing and worked his way through everything and through med school and whatnot. And he's like, someday I'm going to have one of those. And he wanted to get one that was the year he graduated high school.
Which is cool.
And it was this is a year off from that. But he found a car.
Got super close.
In Texas. And he actually bought it from Al Zim, which if you've, over the years in the magazines, you've seen Zim's Autotechnic advertised. And so yeah, she had just got the car when we first got together.
Yeah.
And was still, just getting familiar and uncomfortable. She, she could certainly drive it and whatnot. And, together was like, I think she was starting to get comfortable with getting to do things and meeting people. And now I've driven it a lot, obviously, because it's awesome.
Of course.
And it's something I always, really had wanted, again, especially the fact that my dad had them before. And we started to go things together. And now I treat it, even though I've driven it a bunch and taken it to Target, and really it's been through its paces. But now we go to something, she'll drive that car and I'll drive something else. And she's super proud of the story.
Yeah.
Now she understands and talks about it, drives it fantastic. And we'll never get rid of that car.
Of course, it can't. I mean, especially with the origin story behind it of like the father wanting it so badly and then working his butt off to make it happen. Yeah. And then passing it to his daughter too. Man, so applications for ladies that are out there right now, this is not like dating line, but if you have a classic Porsche and it came through some origin story like that, email me at pcartalk.com. No, but in all seriousness, that is such a cool story. And I am so thankful that I didn't forget to do it, because I would have kicked myself so hard, because I wanted to share that legacy story out there, because, not everybody has like a great legacy story, or not every car, it kind of ends somewhere, right? You don't know sometimes when it gets passed or sold, and that one is so cool. And the fact that it's in your family now, and then you guys are the caretakers for it, and it was her father's, it's almost kind of like that. It's still like her dad's still here, right?
No, it really
is.
Like, it's a super humble, real car. Like it's totally him. Is most no nonsense guy you'll ever meet. And I think he would be, if he was still with us, he'd be super stoked that it's love to take care of this way.
Be like, hey, you want to go to Target Carolinas and ride shotgun? You'd be like, let's do it.
Or I think now he's like, okay, you kids have fun. Kind of thing. So it's
awesome. No, but okay, I'm so glad I brought that up. Now we're really done, but I wanted to bring that up because
glad I remind you.
You didn't remind me of anything, but like my brain started thinking for a change. But so glad to share that story. Thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for being, and your wife being a caretaker and taking care of that car, and being able to share that story and then pass that legacy on at some point. I know you guys are going to, and we talked a little bit about that, but that's awesome, man. So thank you so much again. I don't have anything else for you. We are going to close now. Do you have anything else? All right, cool. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, JRZ, for being our sponsor for the last 6 months. Great relationship, obviously. I mean, it makes sense, and they're into racing like we're into racing. So obviously, sponsorship made sense there, right? So thank you guys, and we'll see you on the next one.
See it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of PCAR Talk. Connect with us on Instagram at PCAR Talk or online at pcartalk.com.